And there's always the story. Now, so I'm working out this morning. I have my AirPods in, and I see that the podcast with Andrew Marchand, New York Post, and John Oran of the Sports Business Journal has been dropped. So I started listening to it while I'm on the Stairmaster. And then 38 minutes into it, and you're going to hear a couple of minutes clip. Nothing here is earth-shattering, but there are some nuggets that will be interesting to what either Marchand or Oran have to say about, yes, something they touch on every single week in the Pac-12 TV contract and media deal.
Well, it wouldn't be a Mando podcast without talk of the Pac-12, Andrew. And last week we had Kirk Schultz, who's the president of Washington State, publicly saying that he expects to have the details of the Pac-12's media rights deal by the end of the month. The end of the month, Andrew, is a little more than 2 weeks away. What are you hearing?
The big question is where that would be, and look, if we can go down all of them, ESPN, unlikely. Amazon, unlikely. CBS, no. NBC USA, no. Fox, no. Okay, those are the biggest players. Then you get into Apple. They're a little bit of a wild card. I've heard certain things, but nothing definitively where I'm 100% sure where it stands with Apple. But I lean towards, I'll just so people don't take that the wrong way, lean toward probably not. But I don't know sure exactly. But they also, the Pac-12 has said they don't want to do just an all digital deal. And that's what Apple is pretty much looks like that's their strategy. Of course, they do the baseball deal, but this is a little bit different than the baseball deal. So that leaves the CW, Scripps, and those type of players. What do you think on those type of guys?
There had been reports that they were talking to those companies probably a couple of months ago by now that my sources denied and said that they weren't talking to those companies. When Schultz makes those comments, it's hard because we can report what we know, but we can't report what we don't know. And so what we know is when you went down that roster about no after no after no, I'm not sure if ESPN's a no. They're just sort of not a yes for a big package and a big payment, which is I think
that's where it is. I guess, yeah, the ESPN, I would say if they were to get a deal with ESPN, it'd probably be for low money. So if they get on ESPN, yeah, I think if they went to ESPN and say, hey, let's do a deal, and it's like $20 million per team or something, then I think maybe they could do that, or maybe in that range. I would be very surprised if they got the same as the Big 12 from ESPN. Very surprised.
They would have to cobble a lot of different pieces together in order to get that.
All right. So one of the things I heard in there, again, was that not even sure that there was a little bit of, I'm not even sure about Apple. They didn't say not Apple, but they were discussing part of that. And they brought up a lot of the different networks or companies that people have tried to figure out who's it going to be when it comes to linear, regular television, or cable. But there they are. And so a lot of times you hear man, can you guys stop talking about it? It's impossible to not talk about until there is a final score, whatever that score is and what happens afterwards. With most likely, you would think the conference can figure out a way. You hope, if you're a part of the Pac-12 or not, I would think that they could work this out.
Well, a lot of time's passed since the last time we heard something similar from those guys who do a great job, and sounds like nothing's really changed. If anything, the number of suitors or the amount maybe is lessened from the last time we checked in there. So it lines up with a lot of what's been said or reported. There's been an attempt to really debunk a lot of, everything that's not necessarily pro Pac-12 as some sort of an agenda. By the way, I hope they got their check from Endeavor for that segment. But, there's been a lot of trying to debunk, and it's like, okay, so, there's no chance anything's happening. Nobody's interested yet. We know for a fact Colorado's actually met with the Big 12. And then you can try and say, well, I don't know how you spin it. They met with them. That's not nothing. I don't care what the contract says or that there's not a contract that immediately followed that. You don't do that if there's not a level of interest, right? So to say that there's just nothing and all this is just completely made up or whatever attempt there's been to try and paint it that way, it's just so obviously not true. It's so obviously not true. As far as them getting a deal and all that, I still believe that's going to happen. I mean, I don't think anybody doesn't think they'll get a deal. But again, it just all circles back to what kind of a deal is that? And so, again, that's the question. That's the only question that really matters was what that deal looks like, particularly the money part of it. And, as far as when that comes, here we got another date. I think this one now, everybody's talking about it a bit more than we've talked about the previous 10 dates or whatever that have come up from time to time.
Well, because time is it's condensed now more than ever.
It's June 14th.
Yeah.
We talked about I just told you yesterday, I'm sitting there on YouTube just looking at stuff, and a John Wilner video pops up, and he's talking to somebody from the Arizona paper or outlet, and they're discussing things that if you were to sit there and say this was released on June 13th, 2023, I would have believed you, but it was of 2022. It was from their media days last year, and basically nothing had changed outside of just maybe there's more SMU talk now, or there's more San Diego State, there's more this or more that. I mean, if anything, there's been more trimmed from the possibilities over the last year than there has been additional, in terms of the networks involved,
right,
and what their possibilities are and the opportunities and the money, and the whole industry has changed since then. So it's a little bit out of date in that regard, but you could play it right now and it would basically line up the exact same as it did back then of don't know where, don't know for how much, don't know this and don't know that, just know the Pac-12 wants to stick together. And that's where we are a year later. So those guys obviously have great sources. They're all over the media game. And, they really don't have as far as to my knowledge, any, Big 12 tie or anything that would make them want to dunk on the Pac. If anything, I would think that they've probably got more allies out there than, media business wise than within the Big 12. But regardless, they're just echoing what we're all kind of seeing as well, and that's that until we see a figure, then these conversations are going to continue and the speculation is going to continue, and you can hate it all you want to, but, that's just the reality is that there's a lot of implications to what that end result is for the Big 12, for the Pac, for SMU, for San Diego State, and the trickle effect. So that's why it's of interest. And yeah, there's the element of there's some people that just want to see that conference die now because it was not open to accepting Big 12 teams once upon a time. That's not a big deal to me. I can wrap my head around that. But the part of why is it realignment's interesting just in general? Why are we talking about the ACC when they've got a 13-year contract remaining and no indication outside of a little scuttlebutt here and there that that's going to be broken? Because it's interesting and because it affects the whole entire ecosystem. And so that's going to continue to be an interesting story until it's not. And the moment it won't be is when they present that TV deal. But again, when is that going to happen?
Yep, I thought it was worth playing the clip. I've asked John to come on the show a handful of times, including even today when I was listening to it. At some point that will happen. We have given you today numerous opinions, as we did, of course, and we try to do every single day for you to also decide how you want to think about a certain topic.
Yeah, and I enjoy I don't listen necessarily every episode, just life, right? I can't listen to have everything or ingest everything or whatever I'm trying to say here. But I do get around to it from time to time, and in particular if I know that they're speaking about, that subject or just realignment in general, because they were all over, the Big Ten TV deal and, the various other TV deals that'll be coming down the pipeline. I'm sure they'll speak about that as well. But they do a lot of the pro sports stuff, and it's just amazing to see how much that part of the industry has really blown up, the coverage of the coverage, so to speak. And now you're a SportsCenter anchor, and you're basically SportsCenter anchors are always going back to Dan Patrick and Overman and all those guys, Berman, all the early ESPN folks. But now it's it's on a different kind of a level of the coverage, and they do a good job with all that.
All right, when we come back,